Welcome to episode 14 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on September 7th, 2019. Because this is a mid-hiatus episode, I'd like to talk to you about everything that has happened since the last one and fill you in on some things that are coming up before the start of season 2. Let's get started. I've actually gotten a good chunk of work done on the Master Knitter program. Honestly, not as much as I'd hoped, but I'm trucking along. My blocking essay is almost done. I should have it ready before I leave for Scotland in a few weeks. Each level of the Master Knitter program involves an essay, and the first level essay is about blocking, washing, and repairing knits. Honestly, I was not worried about the essay at all, and I was going to leave it until the end. But I ended up with so much knitting to get done for other reasons that I decided to do the essay first while I worked on those projects, and then those projects would be out of the way and I could focus on the swatches when the essay was done. And the essay has not been hard. I've been knitting long enough that I know how to block various fiber and stitch types, so I pretty much sat down and wrote the essay from experience and then went through the books to find references to attach to what I wrote. I do have to research a bit on how to repair knits, because I subscribe to the Yarn Harlot's method of darning when something needs repair, where you stand over the garbage can and say, darn, 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 as you drop the damaged piece in. So that's the last bit I need to properly research and write. The problem with the essay is that it's supposed to be 1,000 words tops, which is about 4 double-spaced type pages. And you might not have noticed, but I tend to be a little long-winded. I actually don't talk a lot in person, but when I work from writing, like when I'm speaking or working from a script or doing a blog, I tend to go on. However, the Guild really wants you to be focused on the information they are asking for. So I'll have to go back through once all the information is down and cut it by about half. In order to cover what they want you to cover, you really have to be almost terse with the information. So something to keep in mind for those of you who haven't done your essay yet. If you try to write it like a blog post or conversationally, you are going to run out of words. I'm going to go back in time now and work myself forward and fill you in on a few things that have gone on since I last spoke to you. First, I thought I was done with New York for the summer after my daughter finished up her classes at FIT, but we made one more trip into the city after that. I was invited to a yarn tasting for a few new yarns by Bernat and Red Heart that were hosted by Mikey from the Crochet Crowd and Marley Bird. You probably know who they are if you're a crocheter. It was lovely to meet both of them, but we're going to focus on the yarns. The first is one I was very skeptical of going into the event. They just said it was a yarn you could knit without needles, and I thought, great, this is some sort of crazy gimmick yarn, but my mind was changed about it while I was there. It's called Alize EZ Wool. It's a jumbo yarn with 54% acrylic, 24% nylon, 20% wool, and 2% polyester. The yarn itself is a fluffy I-cord that is arranged in a serpentine pattern, so it curves back and forth. And then along one side of that curvy serpentine pattern, the bends are connected to each other. So the yarn forms 2-inch long loops. It's designed so that you can work the yarn without needles. So rather than casting on, you lay out a length of the loops as wide as you want your object to be, and then you bend the yarn back behind that initial row and pull a loop from the working yarn up through the last loop of the first row, and then pull another loop up through the next to the last loop, and you keep working your way across until you get to the final loop, and then you bend the working yarn back against the back of your work again and start pulling the loops up through the new stitches of your fabric. Because the yarn is bulky and a bit fuzzy, the loops actually stay in place pretty well once they've been worked, so you don't have to worry about it getting pulled out, and you can increase and decrease the same way you would with needles. Honestly, I sat down at the table to give this yarn a try with a bit of a sneer. I was having a hard time holding back my yarn snobbery, and I feel more than a little ashamed about that because in all truth, there are definitely times and places when this yarn would work well. First of all, it's machine washable and dryable, so it's a good yarn choice for friends and family who cannot be trusted to care for natural fibers. The construction of the yarn is soft and smushy, and it feels nice against the skin. Chunky knits are still very in, especially as we head into winter. So this is a good yarn for making a cowl or a scarf for a young woman or teen in your life. Also, I run the children's program at my church, and earlier this year we tried to teach 12 of the older girls how to knit. I was not on my own for that, but still, some of the girls really struggled, as I did when I was young, with the concept of what was going on as they were knitting. So this yarn is a perfect way for brand spanking new knitters to see and understand how the fabric is being constructed while they are knitting. Sometimes it's not the fine motor skills that are the problem when someone's trying to learn to knit, but it's like the cognitive dissonance almost of taking something straight and making it into a fabric that doesn't unravel back to straight yarn. Also, this would be a great yarn for older people who are maybe having trouble with arthritis and they can't hold tiny, tiny needles anymore, but they miss knitting. And of course, if you're traveling, you can throw a ball or two of this on your carry-on and not worried about the one stray TSA agent who doesn't know that knitting needles are permitted on planes. The label said that a 10-inch wide, 6-foot-long scarf requires 4 balls, but you could do a cowl with 1 and a narrower scarf with 2. I came away from the yarn tasting with 2 balls in a light blue, and I think I'm going to use it to make a chunky cowl for one of my nieces for Christmas, and I'll probably go pick up another 3 balls to make a scarf for my other niece in her school colors. There are about a dozen colors on the market right now. The second yarn is kind of trippy, and I also went into it feeling a little yarn snobbish and came away repentant because, again, there are times when this yarn makes sense. It is a red heart, which is why I was being snobby. Because in my mind, when you say red heart, I immediately go to Super Saver, which again has its time and place, but it's not something I love using. But this yarn is almost night and day in feel compared to Super Saver. It's also an acrylic. Like Super Saver, it's still got that machine washability and dryability, but it's soft. It's a soft, touchable acrylic. It's worsted weight, and I sat down and knit several rows with it, and it produced a nice smooth fabric with even stitches. This yarn is different, though, in that, well, first of all, it's called a heat wave. And the name is a reference to the fact that when it's exposed to sunlight, it actually warms up by as much as 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Instantly, my thoughts went to my brothers and my husband who do all the plowing and shoveling in the winter at their homes. Having a hat or mittens that actually get warmer while they're out there would be fantastic for them. Plus, many of us have people in our lives who are outside in the winter all day or are winter hobbyists. This would be great for hats and scarves for skiers and hunters and winter hikers. But even thinking beyond that, if you know a couple who likes to go to football games, this would make a great stadium blanket. Really, anything that you'd make for outer winter wear in a worsted that you'd want to be machine washable could be done with this yarn. This yarn has 13 colors available, and I think I'm going to be doing my brother's Christmas hats in Heatwave this year. Thank you to Spinrite and Yarnspirations for the invitation to the yarn tasting. It was a lovely afternoon, and my mind was opened, and a little bit of snobbery was lost, and that's probably a good thing. I look forward to working with these yarns in the coming months. If you want to find some of them yourself, they're both carried in Joann stores across the country, so go in and give them a feel. Let's take a music break. There is no rhyme or reason to today's music choices. I found a couple of songs that I liked for different reasons in different ways, and I'm plugging them into the podcast for you. You and Me is a little quirky folk love song by Annika Stemper. I hope you enjoy it too.
Hey, it's nice to meet you. What's your name? Sorry if I seem a little bit strange. It's just that I've been waiting for this to come along. Hey, would you mind it if we stayed and talked about the things we hated, like the weather outside, and maybe someday we'll be sipping on something sweet in a little cafe in the heart of Paris. Oh, oh. sipping on something sweet on a little patio, looking out at the sea. Oh, 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 oh. We be listening to the radio, singing all the words of songs that we don't even know. Oh, 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 oh. Hey, have I told you lately that you bring out the best in me? And I can never think of a life where I wouldn't be. Sipping on something sweet, just being with you, 'cause it's all I ever need. Oh, 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 no. We be talking about the good old times and how we knew even then that the rest of our lives would be you and me.
I test knit a pattern recently for Merrily by Design called the Sea Pinks hat. It's a Fair Isle pattern knit in Jamieson's of Shetland spindrift yarn. It's mostly shades of rose and soft pinks and lavender with some bits of green and a merlot-y red through the center of the star motif. Sea pinks are small pink flowers that grow in clumps along the North Atlantic coastlines. The hat is finished off with 3 dangling tassels that are made using the lighter pink yarns with the ends of the tassels wrapped in the green and then the tassels cropped short. So altogether it looks like a bud from the sea pinks plant. These little yarn flowers are then dangled from twisted cords from the top of the hat, and it is adorable. I'll have photos in the show notes, or check out my Instagram at I Thought I Knew How. You can find the pattern on Ravelry by searching for Sea Pinks hat. Merrily's hat has not been the only Fair Isle hat I have knit in the last month or so. I've been on a bit of a binge, really, but I'll give you details on that later. All this Fair Isle knitting has gotten me thinking, though, about Fair Isle and what it is that makes something Fair Isle. Of all the different techniques for color work, what makes one piece Fair Isle while another is not? Because one of the hats that I'm working on now would, I think, be described as a Fair Isle hat by most people, but it says specifically in the pattern notes that it is not a Fair Isle pattern. So what does the designer know about what makes something Fair Isle that I don't? So I was wondering a lot, and I did some research, and I thought I'd share with you. Fair Isle is a place, of course. It's one of the islands that makes up the Shetland Islands, though it's quite a ways from the mainland. I did talk some about the history of knitting in the Shetland Islands back in an earlier episode, so I'm going to try and focus just on the definitions, but some history is going to creep into. Fair Isle as a knitting tradition has a few set criteria. I'm going to be largely paraphrasing from Alice Starmore's book of Fair Isle knitting, but also I'll be drawing some of my information from a Shetland Knitter's Notebook, which is just a little book published in 1991. It's a quick read. I really enjoyed it. So all of that said, each row in a Fair Isle knitted piece uses only 1 or 2 colors that alternate frequently across the row because the yarn not being used is floated across the back, and those floated strands can't be too long or they'll start to get caught on things when you're trying to put the garment on. The patterns are symmetrical and centered on the piece being knitted, so they typically are knit over an odd number of stitches in order to be centered properly. Traditional Fair Isle is worked in the round using 4 needles, but nowadays people away from Shetland will frequently use circulars instead because they aren't as comfortable with the long straight double points. Though I have seen Hazel Tyndall comment online about preferring to stick with straight needles because the work moves more smoothly along a straight needle than it does on a circular needle because of the join between the needle and the cord. With that in mind, I think I'm going to do an experiment, and the next hat I cast on, I want to do using my knitting belt and the long straight needles and just see if I have a preference. Maybe I'll go back to the circular needles because it's what I'm more comfortable with, but maybe there really is a benefit to those long straight DPNs. I'd hate to miss out on those perks just because I don't know about them. As far as the patterns are concerned, the main patterns are typically an alternating XO pattern. So if you imagine 2 circles next to each other and the space that would be left between them, Toward the top and bottom of the circles, there would be a lot more open space to cross over to the next circle than at the midpoint where the circles could touch each other if you wanted them to. So between the two circular shapes, the knitters worked in X-shaped or hourglass-shaped patterns. Because again, you don't want to have to float the yarn you aren't using too far along the back. And in reality, because we're talking about shapes made up of squarish stitches, they aren't so much circles and X's as they are like hexagons or octagons and X's. But within that general framework, designers have come up with all sorts of variations where the hexagons or octagons or O's, however you want to think about them, look like flowers or clusters of hearts or giant snowflakes. In fact, as time progresses, designers started knitting that XO pattern over a taller number of rows to give them more space for creativity. In addition to these XO motifs, there are also what are known as piri patterns or little patterns that are worked over a small number of rows and could be used to add additional length or visual texture. And of course, while you only use 2 colors per row, those 2 colors could change frequently. And some Fair Isle sweaters use up to or more than a dozen colors within the sweater. I think most people would recognize the effect of a motif, say, of a snowflake, where the snowflake starts off white at the bottom and then has a few rows of a silvery gray, and then the center rows are gray before going back to silver and finishing at the top with a few rows of white again. Fair Isle work spread over all of Shetland fairly early on, and these rules began to relax some as more knitters were involved. Very traditional Fair Isle knits have the patterns running in bands around the piece, while other knitters elsewhere in Shetland started experimenting with all-over patterning. So rather than having a band of flowers and hourglasses, the entire sweater might appear to be covered with a diamond-shaped lattice work with a flower or snowflake motif in the open areas. A simple search on Amazon turns up many, many books full of charts for traditional Fair Isle motifs, as well as some more modern takes on the motifs. They serve the same purpose as any other stitch dictionary for designers. They're considered open source, if you will. They're there as a reference for designers to pull from and use in their own designs, or as an inspiration and jumping off point for people to create new twists on the traditions. This is a process that has been present since the early days of the technique. The most likely story of the birth of Fair Isle is that it was an imitation of the patterning knitters were seeing from Scandinavian fishermen working in the waters around Shetland. Though there's also a theory that the people of Fair Isle learned it from the survivors of a Spanish shipwreck some 500 years ago, and it is possible that the Norwegians got their colorwork ideas from the Shetlanders, but most historians I've read discount that theory, though it makes a good story. The piri patterns I mentioned before that are used in areas that need filling and borders were lifted directly from cross-stitch patterns. Knitters drew from the work of other knitters. Because a piece of Fair Isle fabric is essentially a colored grid, it was easy enough to see what someone had come up with for her sweater and apply it to your own as is or with slight alteration. Mary Smith, the author of A Shetland Knitter's Notebook, even observed that if you know what you're doing, you can recreate the sweaters in the black and white photos in her book by just looking at the pictures. In our day of designers and printed patterns, it's easy to forget that for hundreds of years, neither one of those things existed. You knit out of necessity in shapes that best covered the people you were trying to keep safe from the elements. And you either invented patterns on your own or you drew from those around you. The reference guides for Fair Isle that we have now are the result of a couple hundred years of effort made by thousands of women. This is in part why you cannot copyright Fair Isle motifs. They are part of our collective history. Despite my trip to Shetland last year, I had not finished a Fair Isle project until I knit my first Harriet's hat. And since then, I've done the headband and 5 more Fair Isle hats. Plus, I have 1 more on the needles now. To put it mildly, I am hooked on Fair Isle at the moment. Part of it is the thrill of finally getting it. I started a scarf last year and was just not succeeding with it. I put it aside and tried again and still wasn't getting it, but it all finally fell into place. And part of the appeal of it, honestly, is the communal feeling of working in this form. I mean, one of the grand things about knitting is that it is a membership card into a community. I was at the Goshen Fair the other day, and I sent my girls off to ride the rides for as long as a sheet of tickets would last, and I sat on a bench and pulled out my knitting. And in less than 5 minutes, I had someone at my side asking if I watch knitting podcasts on YouTube. We spent a friendly 10 minutes together in kind discussion. How rare a thing that is in today's world. I have finally found not one but 2 knitting groups in my area. They happen on the same day, one right after the other, and I love it. Thursday is my knit club day. I leave the house at 1 and I go to U&U over in Windsor to spend a happy 3 hours there, and then I head over to a Panera in Manchester and I spend 3 hours there, and I am home a little after 8 p.m. Both groups are full of people who have gathered because of a common interest in yarn crafts and have found enough else in common to form full friendships. I feel like when I dive into a knitting tradition and take the time to learn about its history, I start to have that friendly communal feeling, not just with my contemporaries who also might enjoy it, but with all those who practiced those techniques before. I didn't come up with the snowflake motif. No one knows who did. But a few hundred years across time, someone did, and I'm tied to her now. She gave me that gift without knowing, and thousands of other women like her who added their stamp to the tradition, who are now lost to history, they also gave me that gift. We stand on their shoulders, and it can be easy to lose sight of that in this world where we focus on money and attention and credit. The vast majority of us who are out there creating beautiful things today are doing so because so many before us worked it out with no credit or reward. I have some updates for you on Harriet Middleton and the MRI makers and their efforts to raise funds for the MRI scanner appeal. For those of you who are new, the MRI scanner appeal is an attempt to raise 1,650,000 Great British pounds to buy an MRI scanner for Shetland so that patients don't have to make a nearly 300-mile ferry crossing to have this basic medical test performed. To date, the appeal as a whole has raised over £372,000, or about 22% of their goal. The MRI makers are a group of knitters on Shetland who are helping with the fundraising. Their efforts alone have raised nearly £40,000 at the time of this recording, but they may well have crossed that amount by the time this episode airs, because on the day I'm recording this, the pattern for Harriet's fingerless gloves and Harriet's gloves are releasing. Harriet Middleton has come up with a new pattern for fingerless gloves and proper gloves that draw on the same motifs as the original hat. The main star is centered on the back of the hand, and V-shaped patterns run above and below it. The fingerless glove pattern comes with instructions on a really interesting cuff. Rather than a basic ribbing like you'd see on most gloves, you knit a section of flat fair isle for a few inches and then knit the ribbing, and the first section you knit is folded over to hide the ribbing and expose that lovely fair isle you just knit around your wrist. The glove pattern has a more traditional fair isle rib for the cuff and full fingers. You have a few options on how to purchase these patterns. If you want to buy just the gloves, there is a full glove pattern available on the website for £4. If you want just the fingerless gloves pattern, that is also there and available for £4. But if you really would like instructions for both the fingerless gloves and the gloves, because they each have a different cuff design, and of course the glove pattern has instructions on making the full fingers, if you want both, then you can actually buy the fingerless gloves pattern for £4. And then for £2, there is an add-on pattern that you can pay for that will give you the instructions for the fingers and the cuff alone for the gloves. So for £6, you will get all the information that you need to do both the gloves and the fingerless gloves. Or if you just want one or the other, you can spend £4 to get one or the other. The pattern is available at the MRI Maker store. That is at mrimakers.com or MRIMAAKERS.com. All you have to do is go to the website and click through to the pattern section of the store and you'll see them right there. We leave for Shetland a little over a week after this episode airs. We're headed up to Yell first, which is one of the northernmost islands in Shetland, and after a few days there, we will move over to Unst. The hope for this first week is to just have some time to really do nothing much at all. Neither island is particularly built up, and that's exactly what we are looking for. We'll probably take a day or two in that first week and hop over to some more heavily inhabited areas of Shetland, but I'm hoping to just have a lot of time to knit and walk about and look at the sea. My to-do list before the start of Wool Week has gotten rather full. I agreed to test knit the mitten pattern for the MRI makers, which I am totally looking forward to, and I may have in my hands by the time this episode airs, so keep your eyes peeled for that. It should be coming very soon. I've also seen a photo of them, and I'm really itching to get my hands on them. But a few weeks ago, I also set myself the goal to knit all of the official Shetland Wool Week hats, because apparently I like to set myself tasks that involve panicking and being pressed for time. Also, at the time, I had Googled and only found 5 hats, but it turns out there's 6. So I have 2 of them done, the bobble hat and the roadside beanie. The third one is on my needles. That's the Miri Dancer's Tory. And it should be done by the time this airs, so I will have 3 more to do by the time that you're hearing this. I'll stick a photo of the ones I've finished so far in the show notes, but if you want to see the ongoing process, I am constantly posting updates on Instagram. I'm feeling pretty confident, to be honest, but I also think that the last hat is probably going to be finished on the last day we are in Unst before we head back to the mainland of Shetland for Wool Week. We are going to be staying in Scalloway for Wool Week, which is a short drive from most of the activities. Apparently, accommodation in Lerwick for Wool Week sells out nearly a year in advance, so if you're thinking about going next year and don't want to have to hire a car, start looking for bookings now. My husband has connected with a few other husbands, and they are going to be fishing most of the week while I hop around to my different classes and events. He will be joining me for a few tours and classes, but for the most part that week, we will meet up in the evening and compare notes. I'm really looking forward to the classes, but I think the evening events are going to be the best bits. There is a quiz night hosted by Hazel Tyndall and Janet Budge, which sounds really fun. I've never been to a quiz night, so I'm not sure how I'm going to perform. The MRI makers are hosting an event that sounds like it's going to be amazing. There's going to be a traditional dinner served. Some of the members of the Jarl squad from Apelia will be there, which you totally should Google. I can't do it justice in the time that we have left. There will also be a raffle that night, and some of the prizes are a traditional local shawl, a teddy bear made by Wendy Inkster of Burra Bear using Harriet's hat. If you have not heard of Burra Bears, you should Google that as well. Wendy is a creative genius. She uses old sweaters to make remembrance teddy bears for people. Mary Wallen's new book of Fair Isle is going to drop during Wool Week. One of those will also be a prize, and there's even more. I'm like, fingers crossed. I want the Burra Bear. I'm putting it out into the universe right now. I want the Burra Bear. The raffle tickets for that are coming soon and should go on sale. So if you are interested in trying to win some of those, I don't believe you have to be there. I'm pretty sure they'll send it to you. So if any of those prizes sound like they're worth wagering £1 on, check out the MRI makers on pretty much any form of social media. And I'm sure that as soon as the tickets go on sale, there will be notices all over about that. I'm also looking forward to the talk by this year's Wool Week patron, Oliver Henry, about his life working in the Shetland wool industry. Honestly, I feel a bit like I'm going off to knitting college. Classes all day, parties and lectures in the evenings, hanging out with new friends in between. I really, really, really cannot wait. I'm working on lining up some interviews with some of the teachers and presenters, so hopefully I'll have those in the episodes when I first come back. After Wool Week is over, we're going to head to Inverness and drive most of the Scotland 500, which is a loop that travels around the northernmost coastline of Scotland. So another week of quiet and looking at pretty scenery to come down from the craziness of Wool Week. And then that was going to be the end of the trip, and it's still going to be the end of the trip for my husband. He's going to head home at that point, but I'm going to be staying another week because Joe from Skye connected me with the organizers from Loch Ness Knit Fest, and they have invited me to attend as a speaker on the main stage on Saturday. The details of that are still being worked out, but it looks like I'll be doing a talk about podcasting. And also, I'll be interviewing Harriet Middleton's son, Billy, who handles all the social media for the MRI makers, as well as being the one who records and formats the patterns that his mother has come up with. So if you have knit any of the Harriet's family of patterns, you have Billy to thank for those being in print for you. The Loch Ness Knit Fest runs from October 17th through 20th at the Inverness Leisure Centre. Any of you who find yourself in the UK at the time, come on by and say hi. I would love to meet you. I'll be at different events and floating around the marketplace and the Natter Lounge from Thursday through Saturday. I will not be able to be there on Sunday, unfortunately, because I do actually need to go home at some point. There are some really interesting presentations and classes going on at Loch Ness Knit Fest too, and I'm hoping to talk to some of the presenters about some knitting history and Dorset buttons and more. So again, if that all works out, I should have some interesting interviews to share when I get back. So if you want more on that, it's available at lochnessknitfest.com. I have another song. This one is a very sad country song, so prepare yourselves. This is We've All Been Pushed by Neil Cross.
Well, we've all been pushed around, from here and out to the school ground, left our hearts in the lost and found. 'Cause we've all been pushed around. Well, we've all been swept away, out to sea, no time to pray. Lost everything you tried to say, 'cause we've all been swept away, yeah. Well, we've all been laid low, caught in between which way to go, to the mountain high or the valley floor. 'Cause we've all been laid so low. We've all been bought and sold, for some cold comfort we gave our souls. They dealt us cards and then they made us fold. 'Cause we've all been bought and sold. And we've all been pushed around, from here and out to the school ground, left our hearts in the lost and found. 'Cause we've all been pushed around, yeah. Oh, we've been laid, I've been pushed around. I left my heart in the lost
A few more things before I go. I wasn't planning on doing a giveaway for this mid-hiatus episode, but there's a prize that has not been claimed from season 1, despite my best efforts to get in touch with the winner. It is the hank of hand-spun alpaca from my trip to Peru a few years ago, along with a project bag from Little Comforts A to Z on Etsy. She makes lovely little project bags that have no zips or snaps to snag your yarn, but they still close up securely. To enter, find the post about the episode on the Facebook or Ravelry groups or on Instagram and tag a friend and tell them why they should listen to the episode. Tag as many different people as you want. Each tag is an entry. I'll pick a winner at noon my time on September 17th, so it's just a week after this airs, so act quickly. This time the giveaway will be open to anyone with a mailing address in the US or the UK, and I will mail it from the appropriate side of the Atlantic in the days that follow the drawing. Since the last time we spoke, I did a review of Manos de Uruguay's Alma that you can find at the website for the show, IthoughtIKnewHow.familypodcast.com. It's a fingering weight superwash wool that I fell completely in love with. Hop on over there to read more about it. Next time you'll hear from me with an episode should be on October 22nd, and we'll continue on with episodes every 2 weeks from there until it's time for another break. But in the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you would like to contact me, you can email me at ann@familypodcasts.com. That's Ann with an E at familypodcasts.com. Look for me on social media as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter where it's just Thought I Knew How. The Facebook and Ravelry groups are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast, and the website for the show is IthoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com. There you will find show notes for each episode, including links to everything I talked about on the show. Please consider helping fund the podcast by giving Drops Detergent a try. There's going to be a link in the show notes for that. Also, look on MRImakers.com for the newest additions to the Harriet's Hat pattern family. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.